You're listening to In Our Headphones.
Your chance to discover the songs KEXP DJs don't want you to miss. I'm Janice Headley.
And I'm Isabel Khalili. And this is your never-ending source for new music discovery from listener-powered KEXP.
Hey everyone, Janice here, and on this week's episode of In Our Headphones, we're talking to KEXP's longtime host of WOPOP, our modern global music show, on the air Tuesday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. Pacific. It's Darek Mazzone. Welcome to In Our Headphones.
Thank you. Good to hear your voice.
It's good to hear yours as well. So, Darek, if I understand correctly, you've recently returned from some travels. Can you tell us a little bit about where you've been?
Sure. I was in, it was a pretty big trip, actually. In October, I'm usually gone for a variety of reasons, traveling in different parts of the world. This time, I was in Korea, then I was in Taiwan, then I was in Malaysia, then Dubai, then Manchester, UK, for a big event there. And my 80s Club Kid manifestation worked really well there. I could share some stories with you.
Yes, please.
Then I ended up in Lisbon and then back to Seattle.
Amazing. I mean, I'm sure there's so many, but what are a few of the highlights of this trip?
Oh, let's see. It was my first time in Malaysia. And that was amazing. It's an incredibly complicated and beautiful country that has a intriguing colonial history, has a intriguing history tied to spirituality. It has an animist, Buddhist, Hindu background, and now it is Muslim. And it's late to Islam. And the music and the culture and the food of the country is really, really intriguing. And it was my second time in Dubai, and that city is so like Blade Runner on steroids in so many ways. I always love going there because it is such an interesting mix of past, present, and future.
And yes, your stop in Manchester. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Oh, sure. I love music of Manchester. There was a huge event that I visit every year there this year. It's usually in different cities throughout Europe. It's called WOMEX. It's World of Music Expo. And I got a chance to meet artists from all over the world. The interesting thing about this expo and music and art in general is that often internationally, especially in Europe and in Asia, music and art and culture are considered like utilities. These are the things that are important to people, like electricity and water. So there's a lot of support for artists, especially artists that are focusing on aspects of tradition and ritual tied to their music and education. They get a lot of support from their governments. So it was an opportunity to really spend some time with individuals, organizations, and the artists who are really at the cutting edge of expressing their culture and their identity through music and art. And then, of course, I was in Manchester, so I got my picture taken with some family and friends in front of Salford's Lads Club, just like the Smiths. And I have a great little photo series that we shot on a bridge where Joy Division had with their greatest hits record shot. It was a beautiful little moment, obviously tied to the hacienda and some of the club culture tied to Manchester. There's a really interesting parallel to Seattle and Manchester that I love exploring.
That is so cool. And so some of the artists that you have chosen for today's episode are artists that you saw on this trip. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, let's just jump right into it. And you can talk about what's been in your headphones lately. So, Darek, what is the first track that you brought today?
The first track is by the band Ayaz, and it's Buzzi. Πάμε βουρτί για να δούμε τα μπέλια. Μες στον ύπνο μου τα κλέβια του σφόρου. Που φύτεψαμε με καβούν και με γέλια και κουρτίζουμε. Τι τσαμπάζει Ayaz, με κουρώνεις καρτάζ. Πας τα στέρκα τα κάλα και καθροίζουν για μας. This is a pretty phenomenal band from the island nation of Cyprus. Now, if we don't know much about Cyprus, it doesn't really bubble up as far as international news, but it is tied to an ancient history, battles between Greek and Turkish efforts, Ottoman efforts to control the place. It has got both Christian and Muslim energies around it. And so anytime you have a country that's got a border within it and has a history of conflict, really interesting music and art manifests from that. And this is a perfect example of this. This is Antonio, who people might know from his bands Trio Teke and Monsieur Domani, digging into some of that history. Now, this is an interesting play on some tradition, folk instruments that are amplified, ritual beats. It's a combination of Greek and Anatolian melodicism, which has been a mainstay of the music coming out of the island nation. But also it's looking at a relatively recent history that's had a resurgence throughout the world, and that is the influence of psychedelic music from the late 60s and early 70s throughout the world. You see this in bands like Altun Gun as an example. Who are kind of rediscovering not their deep roots, like going back to the villages, but what their grandparents were listening to as influences of like Hendrix and Jefferson Airplane and the Doors started to come in and work their way throughout the world. And they do a really great job. And I got a chance to talk to Antonis for a little while. We had an interview that I'll put on Wopop and KEXP a little bit later. And he's just one of those interesting characters that just feels like, okay, you are a perfect example of what's going on in 2024 in Cyprus and throughout the world.
Well, let's take a listen. This is Buzz Ayaz and the song Buzzi Ayazi.
Από τους τσέρους που μας στέλνουν σημάδια με τη φλοβελώνη πρόσεχε με ραφτής Ένιξε νοκιόν τα γυρμένα τα βάθια τρύπα την τη φούσκα την προς είναι ανοιχτής Και με καθόταν όσες είναι στα μάτια των γυρούρκων ιδιών για να δεις Ξέρω το διψάς και με λύζει για χάτια και της προκοπής πιο μαζί μας Και με καθόταν όσες είναι στα μάτια μες στις φιλοσές του νοφιλή να γευτείς Άκου τους τσέρους που μας στέλνουν σημάδια μες στις φιλοσές Την τσαπάζει Ayaz με κουρώνεις καρτάς
You just heard the track Buzzi Ayazi from Cyprus-based band Buzz Ayaz, and you can find that on their self-titled debut album, which came out in late summer. All right, Derek, what song do you have next for us?
So, as you know, I'm an immigrant, and that plays a huge part in a lot of the choices that I've made in my career and in how I look at living in the world and living in the United States and being lucky enough to travel throughout the world. When I left Poland, it was under communism. And when I came to the United States, I was very young. I was 9 years old. And there was no going back. You know, it was like you left. There was no exchanges between the countries. It was two completely different political systems. There was fear of nuclear war. So after the wall came down in 1989, I went back for the first time. And it was an interesting place to be there because it was a shedding of anything that had to do with communism or the Soviet system. And it was done really quickly where it was kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Nobody cared about any of the things that were going on in the past. Everybody wanted to sound like a Western rock band. So, you know, there was a version of The Doors, a version of the Smiths, a version of New Order in Polish. And that was the thing that they wanted to present and offer as their cultural expression. After a while, a lot of these artists just felt like hollow, is the description that a lot of them shared with me, because this isn't their history. This isn't their roots. Right. You know what I mean? This is like the roots of England. It's the roots of the United States. And so they started to look back into some of the traditions that were not packaged as like Soviet cultural offerings as a counter to the decadent Western offerings. Like it was a period of time where you could get arrested for having records from Western artists in that country, and so. There was a lot of stuff that was like presented like, no, this is the music, this is wholesome, this is for you. And once the wall came down, people were like, this is all bullshit, I want nothing to do with this thing. After a while, they started going back to the villages and started to like check out some of the music and the art and a culture that gave them a sense of connecting with where they were really from. Warsaw Village Band was one of the first ones to really do that. They actually went into the villages, started to study with the old masters, the people that made their instruments and were singing these ancient songs about being tied to the land and the harvest and the forest and all of these things. And these renowned musicians just found an incredible calling to that and started to put this out, this new wave of music that was a mix of a bunch of different things, but had that tied to their tradition. They started to evolve in many different ways. And the most recent record, which is called Twines, just dropped from Warsaw Village Band, is a mix of Poland as it is right now, which is a very cosmopolitan cities per se, Warsaw, Krakow, Gdansk, etc., that has a pretty diverse population, and you can see that reflected through the music. And this is especially on this particular track, Kalinowy Mostek, which means Bridge of the Wayfarer Tree, from Warsaw Village Band, off their new record, Twines. In Polish, it's Sploty. I hope you like it.
So, Darek, you mentioned that you moved here when you were 9. When did you start to get interested in like the music from Poland?
Well, it was always there. The thing that's interesting about growing up in a communist country is that there was a connection to other communist countries. So there would be these cultural exchanges that were going on. You would hear music from Vietnam, Laos, Angola, Mozambique, and all the other countries that were part of the communist mind space world. And they would try to fit Poland in there. But it was often like, if you're trying to create a unified system, some of the rough spots get kind of like brushed away and you're presenting one form. So it got a little dry after a while, but it were fabulous shows. It was like gigantic showcases. You would go in, you'd have your little red kerchief and you'd watch, the communist world on stage. This was propaganda, it was dogma, it was presented to us and we learned a bit. And then it was also tied to how we grew up. It's a Catholic country. We have many rituals. Easter's a big deal. There was always music. There's always something going on there. And then when I came to the States, like anybody else, I was like, I had a little bit of that in my, with family and friends and, holidays. But I really started digging into Polish music after the wall came down, after it became more of an exchange. And obviously there's a lot of Poles, especially in the United States, so it became much more of an exchange. And some of these artists that were doing this kind of interesting exploration got a chance to play. And Warsaw Village Band is one of the first bands that when we moved to Dexter, we were able to have them on. This is pre-video. This is Wopop. I'm Darek Mazzone, and I have the great pleasure of having the Warsaw Village Band in the studios here tonight. They're part of the Seattle International Children's Festival. They're here for 5 days, and they're going to grace us with some music. So let's kick it. Proszę. But it was one of the first Polish bands that we had on at KCMU then? Oh no, KEXP then. And then and it was a very powerful moment for me because it connected me to this history. Yeah.
I was going to say that must have been so special. Yeah. That's remarkable. Well, let's listen to a little bit of it right now. This is Kalinowy Mostek, Bridge of Wayfarer by Warsaw Village Band. just heard the track Kalinowy Mostek, Bridge of Wayfarer by Warsaw Village Band. And you can find that on their new album, Twines. And you can hear all these songs in their entirety in a few different ways. Using the In Our Headphones playlist over on Spotify, the What's in Our Headphones playlist on YouTube, or at kexp.org/podcasts, and just click on today's show page. Darek, can you tell us a little bit about the next song that you brought today?
Sure. So this is a band out of Beirut called SANAM. And this is a live version of a song that I love quite a bit called Nass. And this is a really interesting band. So, as I said before, I travel a lot, and I am intrigued anytime I go to a place that has a lot of external and internal pressure based on culture, religion, migration, and history. And when you combine all those things, you manifest a city called Beirut. Always in the news, often in the worst possible ways. But in that pressure and that mix of refugees and all these cultural expressions, you have fabulous music. And Beirut is a 21st century town. So it's not isolated. It's not like one of those things where you just walk through a forest or into a mountain and you find a village and there's somebody doing really something intense there that is unique to in of itself. This is a city that has a vibrant jazz scene, vibrant rock scene. It is like a center of Middle East culture, Islamic culture especially. So you've got these hybrids of instrumentation and song creation that sound like, imagine jazz and hip hop originated in Beirut instead of New York. The instrumentation is of Ottoman history. There's a bunch of street culture that is coming from Cairo, and also the pressure and the experience that you get from an expat population. There's a lot of Lebanese throughout the world. They're the Phoenicians. They were like some of the first travelers as they colonized North Africa and beyond. So there's a lot of really powerful history there. And the music isn't really tied to like a exoticism per se. It's not, does it sound like Oriental, like the old adage used to be when you had like Oriental record bins in record stores. It really sounds like something of 2024, an interesting mix of free jazz, improvised rock, traditional Egyptian song, Arabic poetry, all of these things that to me say, you need to pay attention to me. There's more to the world than just Western cultural hegemony. This is a sound of the world post American and Western imperialism. This is something that speaks to my heart and to my mind, as in like, this is a path forward. And I'm actually going to try to bring them to North America, bring them to the Pacific Northwest. I mean, as you know, KEXP is in my day job. I do a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm a cultural engineer more than anything else. And so if I see somebody or hear somebody like this, I need to bring them into town, because if I'm feeling this, then the audience can feel this. And this type of music to me is like, it's not complete unless it's experienced live. And everybody in a room understands it and feels it. Doesn't have to speak, Arabic, doesn't have to understand the culture or the history of it. They just connect with it because it opens up their hearts. And it's one of those opportunities where suddenly through music, our shared humanity is manifest.
Absolutely. And we are so lucky to have your efforts in the Northwest, because You've brought so many amazing bands to our city, and I can't wait for this to be another one on the list.
Thank you.
Let's take a listen. This is the track Nass by the band SANAM. You just heard Nass by Beirut-based band SANAM. You can find that track on their latest album, Live at Cafe Otto, which came out earlier this year. And finally, every week, we've been asking our DJs to share a song with our listeners that isn't necessarily something new, but just something that has a special meaning to them. And Darek, what song did you choose?
I chose A Love Supreme, John Coltrane, the first movement. Which was the first time that I got a chance to hear a powerfully abstract concept of mysticism and soul exploration worked through a song, worked through actual music. It was the first time that I didn't need lyrics. I didn't need prose. I just felt like this artist is able to connect on a transcendent level. And when you think about that, in all the languages that you have in the world, and how reliant we are on voice, and how reliant we are on trying to understand each other in a cerebral way, this is a way to completely transcend language and connect on a collective level that hopefully, you know, I'm an optimist and a bit of a utopian, that will counter xenophobia, propaganda, and just like the too much hate that's going on right now. So this was a revelation to me.
And how did this song first cross your ears?
I started working at a college radio station and found a really super interesting community of lunatics there. And the station had a fire in the 70s, early 70s, so it lost a huge amount of its library. And it was a freeform radio station, so it ended up sort of a huge fan base all over New England. And they ended up, it was a drive to get music back in, because you know, this goes back to a time where you had to own music, you had to own records, and so they ended up getting this gigantic record collection of incredibly diverse music. And then in 1987, I start there, and I'm in paradise, because I'm just suddenly surrounded with all this music from all over the world, and I'm doing all these shows, and I just found my path.
This is John Coltrane and Acknowledgment. just heard the legendary John Coltrane and the track Acknowledgment, the opening song to his acclaimed 1965 album, A Love Supreme. And that was a formative track pick from Darek Mazzone. Darek, thank you so much for being our guest this week.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate you.
Listeners, you can catch Darek every other week on Wopop, Tuesday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. Pacific, co-hosting with DJ Jody B. Fly. And now we're going to check in with KEXP's music director, Chris Sanley. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Janice. Happy to be back with you.
So every week, Chris is listening to thousands of songs, adding new singles and albums to KEXP's rotation. And out of all the new music that you've heard lately, what track has been stuck in your headphones?
So I keep returning to the sensational debut album from Danish-Chilean composer Molina, entitled When You Wake Up, and I'm just fully entranced by the album Closer, which is a collaboration with Copenhagen-based composer and producer Buch. So this is Organs.
In the post-summer, the organs begin to blush. They're blushing and bursting.
Is so hypnotic.
Absolutely. Like, that's what I love about it so much. It's really like moody and bewitching with those like layered droney synths and guitars and that propulsive drum work. I just can't get enough of it. I think she's such a poetic lyricist, which is one thing I really love about her, and you'll hear that throughout the whole album. And it was really written during this kind of profound moment of transition, because she was mostly working on this album while she was pregnant. So you hear a lot of this kind of like transition and growth and change happening throughout the album. And like this song in particular, like you really hear that, and you can take it at face value, like very literally, just as the days are growing shorter and shorter and we're approaching winter. You hear these lyrics like, just like a heart attack, where's the light at?
Just like a heart attack.
That will repeat throughout the chorus of the song a lot, and can also be interpreted more metaphorically as we're continuing to really swirl and spiral into a collective darkness, trying to stay afloat. And so you hear these lyrics like drowning but breathing, or bleeding and longing. And I think just the repetitive nature of this song too, just it feels like a meditation that you can really truly get lost in. And those are the types of songs that I'm just really gravitating towards, where you just like, you're so immersed in the song, you can't have a wandering thought outside of it. And that's where this track really, really plays big for me.
I love it. And I was watching our in-studio session with Buch on KEXP's YouTube channel earlier this morning, and I was like, wow, what a perfect collaborator for Molina to work with.
Oh, they were like such a perfect pairing, and that session is so stunning. I highly recommend that everyone go check it out if they haven't yet, because she's just such a talent. So it felt like a real match made in heaven for the two of them to come together for this project and this song.
Seriously. Well, let's take a listen. This is Molina and the track Organs, featuring Buch.
They're drowning but breathing.
You just heard Molina and the track Organs, featuring ML Buch. And you can find that on her latest album, When You Wake Up, which came out last month via Esho Records. And that was an In Our Headphones pick from our music director, Chris Sanley. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to Derek. And thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of In Our Headphones. You can listen to the songs featured on today's episode in their entirety in a few different ways. There's the In Our Headphones playlist on Spotify, the What's in Our Headphones playlist on YouTube, and you can visit the show page at kexp.org/podcasts. There are also links to the artist Bandcamp pages, so you can support them with a purchase if you'd like. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, or share it with a friend. We'd also love to hear from you if you have feedback. You can write to us directly at headphones@kexp.org. KEXP is an independent nonprofit radio station, so this podcast, along with all of our programming, is made possible by the generous support of our listeners. If you'd like to be one of those generous supporting listeners, you can make a donation of $6 a month at kexp.org/headphones. In Our Headphones is hosted and produced by Isabel, Khalili, and myself, Janice Headley. Audio was mixed by Emily Fox and mastered by William Myers. And our director of editorial is Larry Mizell Jr. Our theme song is How Ma by the band Chinese American Bear. Tune in next week as Isabel introduces you to KEXP's Ambient Club for a very special edition of the podcast. I'm Janice Headley. See you next time on In Our Headphones from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters.